Welcome to episode 164 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode is brought to you by PSCU, the nation's premier payments, CUSO, and an integrated financial technology solutions provider. Visit PSCU.com to learn more and discover PSCU TV, a new thought leadership platform hosted by PSCU's one and only Chief Growth Officer and all-around great guy, Brian Scott. Each episode explores top-of-mind insights in the credit union industry. Today, I'm having a conversation with Gerry Singleton. Gerry is the president and CEO of the Montana Credit Union Network.
Gerry, welcome to the show, my friend, and congratulations.
Oh, thanks so much, Randy. I am really excited to be here and obviously to catch up and connect with you. And last time we were together, we were climbing a mountain. So it's good to be here in person with you today.
I know this is going to be an episode that I struggle with not only time, but keeping any sort of direction because there's so many things that we could talk about, which I know, but I will do my best. I want to jump right in. For those who don't know you, you had a great career at CUNA Mutual Group, now TruStage. Your former boss was just recently on the show. It was great to have Bob Trunzo on. But before even that, before CUNA Mutual Group, a little background on Gerry. Where did you start your career and how did it lead you to where you are in credit unions today?
Absolutely. And what a great question, too. It goes all the way back to college, actually, Randy. When I was at Purdue University, my freshman year, I went to work in the summer, after my freshman year in Yellowstone National Park. And that's where I met my wife. She's from Oregon. I'm from Indiana, but we met working in Yellowstone National Park. And we're both teachers by training. And so we came back the second summer and said, hey, I remember you from last summer. And then we got to be friends and then a little more than friends. And we just kept coming back. And then once we got married, we lived in the park year round. And our son was born in Yellowstone, our oldest son. And so that really got us started. And we were both teachers in the park. So we were educators for the concessionaires in the park. And then that moved us to Georgia, working for the computer software company that ran all the hotels and all the facilities in Yellowstone. And it was from there, shortly after that, the organization I worked for had a credit union. And so my role as a training manager was to teach our employees, bring the credit union in to teach our employees about car buying and home buying and things like that. And one of our and then I was asked to go to a Georgia League and affiliates train the trainer session. So the credit union manager paid for me to go there and said, hey, I want to understand more about how the league does education. And so she paid for me to go there. And I met somebody at CUNA Mutual who said, hey, are you looking for a job? And I said, not really, but I could be. Right. And long story short, I started right as HR 1151, when President Clinton signed HR 1151 into action in 1998. That's when I started in credit unions. And Randy, I have to be honest, I thought there was all the clapping and cheering and all the stuff. And you start hearing people talk about the power of a thing called the movement, the credit union movement. I thought I'd joined a cult, to be honest. I wasn't sure what I had joined. And next thing you know, it's 25 years later and I'm part of that cult happily. So.
I was going to say, I think when you get a bunch of us together, maybe at a GAC or something, it sometimes can feel that way, right?
Yes, so, absolutely. And what a wonderful journey it's been.
I love that story. And I have to say the idea that you and your wife met in Yellowstone, when you mentioned that we saw each other on a mountain. So I need to throw that out there. You were Master Hiker Gerry that got us all up the mountain. So we still appreciate you and need t-shirts and bobbleheads and stuff. But just briefly on that, what an amazing opportunity you and I both had with some of our credit union friends to summit Kilimanjaro, the highest point in Africa. Can you talk to me a little bit? I've had, Jill and I have talked about it. Caroline was on, talked about it. Now that you've had some time to come back, what did you bring home from that experience? And I guess what was the motivation to say yes when Lois called?
Sure. Well, as you know, when Lois calls and asks a question, the answer is yes. There are no other answers than yes. And it was actually, seriously, it was an easy yes. George Ambato, the executive director of Acosta, and Lois, when they come to you and say, do you want to help change a continent, which in turn is going to change the world? That's an easy yes. So as far as my motivation, to know what the Academy is designed and is doing across the continent is bar none amazing, right? And it defies belief in a lot of ways of the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having. And to be able to open the Academy and to know that there needs to be international, global support for building the Academy, right? And I had in my small world of influence, right, had some ways to help support the Academy and the work, and climbing was a big piece of that. So to answer the second part of your question, the motivation was easy. My life's motto has been attitude, ability, impact. I want to make a difference, right? And I want to do it with the best attitude I can. I want to always learn, so have the best ability possible. And I want to make a difference, so have an impact. And this was a way to do that with and through others. So that was powerful. And then to do the mountain, it was probably the hardest thing I've had to do physically, right? And emotionally to a certain extent. It takes a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot to get up there.
Mentally too, yep.
And to know that we could do it together with our credit union friends, I think that was knowing we could do it. I had full confidence that we could do it together. I didn't have confidence that I could do it by myself, but I had full confidence that together we could do it. And so I think that was one of the big lessons when you put your mind to something with others who are like-minded. Like I could have joined a tour or a group and done it and got to be real good friends with people, but to do it together was so powerful. And I know we've talked about this before, but you know, many of us are friends and we're friends before this. We're a whole new level of friends. Like when
you're a whole new level of friends.
Yeah. When you climb a mountain for 6 days with people and all that entails, you get to be a different level of friends.
You and I bunked with Mr. Mark Meyer from Filene, so we learned all about Mark.
Yes, we did.
His habits. So
yes. Maybe a little more than we want to know, but yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I was just recently back in Africa doing the African DE program, and afterwards, George had asked me and Lois to speak about the Climb Africa experience just to that group of people. And, you know, one of the things that came back to me was something that you just said was like, in hindsight, I don't think I could have done it on my own, period. I don't think I would have summited it, but it was the teamwork and just the support of our entire group that made it all possible. And it was not an individual experience.
Totally agree, Randy.
I'd love to talk to you for a second about, you know, the new gig. You're at the president and CEO of the Montana Credit Union Network. I know you had loved being at CUNA Mutual Group. Can you talk a little bit about this decision where an opportunity comes up and I'm sure it was a tough one for you and your family to make this move?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a hard decision and it was an easy decision. I guess I could say it was both. It was a hard decision in that I love my role. I love the team I've worked with. I've been at TruStage, formerly CUNA Mutual, been at TruStage for 25 years and loved that experience. And we called our team bridge builders and dot connectors, right? And most of the team, 2 of my employees have been there over 40 years, others 20 years, 25 years, right? And we've worked together most of that entire time as a team. And so we consider, like I said, dot connectors and bridge builders across the credit union movement, taking TruStage to credit unions and bringing credit unions and the movement to TruStage. And TruStage contributes, $25 to $30 million every single year to support credit unions and credit union causes, not only in the United States, but globally. Obviously, they supported Climb Africa heavily. And so that made the decision really hard in a lot of ways. Most of my career, I've worked with leagues around the country and the association. So what made it easy, Randy, is to know the difference that leagues are making in their states for credit unions to serve their members and their communities. That was an easy come to. Montana's credit unions, while it's an independent, small, but mighty credit union league, their staff is unbelievable. And I've told them this even way before I even considered this role. They are the creme de la creme, if you will, when it comes to their commitment, dedication, their experience, their wisdom, their effort, and their skills in supporting Montana's credit unions. They're sought after, right? They're known across the country. They've won Herb Wegner Award in the past. So they make it happen, Randy. And so to be able to join an organization like that and to serve credit unions here in Montana, that's exciting. The second thing I would mention is the board. And I could go on, we could spend the whole time just talking about why I made the yes. But I do have to tell this story, though. In the interview process, the very last interview, when we were having a few questions back and forth, and then we had dinner together. And it was during those conversations, Randy, when the board was asking me questions about me and my family and the decision. So they weren't just looking out for the role. They weren't looking for only for qualifications and all of those things. They were looking out for me. Like, who does that in the corporate world, right? How awesome is that? And I told them that. I said, that sold it for me, because they looked out for me as a person. They looked out for my family to make sure it was the right fit for us if we were to say yes and come into it. So
I'm sure it didn't hurt too that it was just down the road, basically,
exactly.
Right? You're a Montana guy. So.
Right. And this is my home state, right? And the credit unions here, the nearly 50 credit unions in Montana are doing amazing work, many times in extremely remote areas of the state where there are no other financial services for their members and the communities. And so they're doing really, really powerful and good work.
That is awesome. I'm very happy for you and your family for that, and Montana's credit unions, quite honestly. So, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about credit unions. You mentioned your past, and I think you're uniquely qualified to have this conversation. When you're looking at it nationally, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see that we as a credit union movement are facing?
I think if I boiled it down into a word, Randy, I would say relevance. And on many, many levels, right? You think of fintech and all the things that are happening virtually, competitors that we had 20 years ago are not really even competitors today. And so what's on the horizon? What's on the what's next kinds of things? And so I think we need to be, as a movement, be very mindful of that and what is our relevance, regardless of the size of our credit union. Right. And so I think that leads to a second one, but relevance, I think, is the overarching theme. The second one I would say is we have continued bifurcation, if you will, within our movement, as we face consolidation and concentration, which has been going on for a really, really, really long time and will continue into the future. How do we make sure we maintain that relevance, regardless of that, for not only our members, but for our communities? Because there's a lot of not yet members in our communities. And if we look at the community impact, the social impact, the economic impact that credit unions have in their communities and beyond, it's profound if you think about it. And so what can we do there? TruStage worked with Feline late last year and just launched this year the Thriving Small Credit Union research to say smaller credit unions, many of them are doing amazing things and they're thriving. And if you benchmark them, they benchmark against a $5 billion credit union very well. The thriving small credit unions are. So they're doing things really, really, really well. And so, one of the things they do is have a puzzle solving mindset, right? Trying to figure out what is that puzzle we're trying to solve for our members that only we can solve, that nobody else can solve, in our communities and with our members. And so I think we have these pockets of learnings that we can do regardless of the size of our institutions. And that's going to be critical to our success.
I couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned it earlier with some of Montana's credit unions. They're serving communities that nobody else is serving, quite honestly. And if the small credit unions go away, many of those communities may not be served as well, right? Like, I'm not trying to be too broad on that, but
yep.
A twofold question. Let's go to the positive side. I know both of us are positive guys.
Yes.
So when you think about what you and your team in Montana are working on for the credit union movement there, and then as well as nationally, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about the future. And what I mean by that is the future is bright. There are a lot of down moments, if you will, for consumers who are struggling and facing, financial ruin, if you will. What I'm excited about, though, is that credit unions have solutions that work, right? And they're there for their members because they know their members and they're able to really provide the right level of consultation and advice and products and services that are relevant to them. And they're not doing it for their own benefit or their own bottom line. They're doing it for their members. So I'm super excited about that. And I think the answer, and I use this in my interview with the board as well, I think the answer to our movement in a lot of ways is collaboration, right? And so I'm excited about it. I'm seeing more and more collaborations, sometimes out of necessity and oftentimes out of opportunity, where people come together. And so I'm excited about the collaborations I'm seeing. And in fact, Montana's credit unions working with the Minnesota Credit Union Network and with Wisconsin Credit Union League have formed a tri-state collaboration that is exactly that, right? And I think we'll see more of that in the league and association world. I know we're seeing it more and more in the credit union world. And that's frankly how we're going to continue to be relevant to our members and our communities.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'd like to talk with you a little bit about like mentors. I know you've been a mentor to many, but talking about Gerry's mentors along the way to the CEO chair, are there people that have helped in your career that you've leaned on? And maybe as an add-on, you're there. How do you plan, let's say, over the rest of your career to give back to that next generation?
Sure. Those are great two-part questions. You might have to remind me of the second one after I talk about
I will if I don't. Yeah.
The first one. I was thinking, I figured you maybe were, after listening to previous podcasts, I was thinking maybe you're going to ask me that question. So I just made a mental note of some of them and why. I tried to say, here's a person, here's the word that describes why they were that mentor to me. Bob Trenzo, of course, the president and CEO of TruStage. Huge mentor to me along the way. And I learned lots and lots of lessons from him, two that I can talk about. But the word that came to my mind for him is grit, right? Grit is that wonderful juxtaposition of passion and determination. And that's huge. And two lessons I think I learned greatly from Bob. One is, especially when you're in leadership and you're dealing with people and situations that deal with people, which is basically what we do every day. There's seldom pure black and white, yes or no, this or that. It's oftentimes both and, it's in the gray. And early in my career, when I was working with Bob on a couple of projects, I wanted to make it more black and white. And he sat me down and said, you know what? We're dealing with people. It doesn't work that way, right? It's gray. And I tell you what, I have used that as advice to give to others that I've mentored along the way. And I still use it, right? And it's 15 years later or more. So that's been a huge one. The other one is having your back. So a few years ago, I was asked to lead the effort that was going to be a really hard decision in credit union land with big implications and repercussions. And Bob asked me to lead the charge on that, which I did. And it got hard. Right. We talked about climbing Kilimanjaro was the hardest thing physically. This was the hardest thing I've ever done professionally. And it was hard. It was harder than hard. And what made it less so was knowing that Bob had my back. And sometimes when you are asked to lead a charge and it doesn't go the way you expected, the leader might say, oh, he went too far. He didn't mean that. Or they back up. That's not Bob. Right. Bob had my back. And I knew that. And that was super important. So the others will be quicker, but that grit is what I would share specifically about Bob. And those of you who know Bob, that's absolutely true. And I could say a lot more there. I think of Kathy Mann at Inclusive. Kathy has been a wonderful mentor. And the word I wrote for her is purpose. She is a great storyteller and goes in with purpose when she's leading, and she's leading others and leading the movement for CDFIs and MDIs and so many others. Purpose. She goes in with a strong purpose. Blended to that is Gigi Highland with passion, right? When you talk about financial well-being for all, when Gigi is up talking and connecting the dots and telling the stories, she's able to personalize it so beautifully, but it describes that passion that credit unions have. Renee Sattywhite with AACUC.
Oh,
the words I wrote
there.
Some
of my favorite people.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Commitment to change, right? Commitment to change. Absolutely. And then I wrote George Umbato from Acosta, and there I wrote change the world.
Oh, he has such a quiet confidence that is so just even.
100%.
Sorry to jump in, but
100%. Yep. The same people. The list, my list is probably your list, and it's so many others' lists. Lois Kitch, right there. I wrote give it your all, and then give some more, and then give a little bit more, and just keep on going. The journeys, the stories. I know you've had her on the podcast as well too. So fantastic. I just have a couple more. Tracy Kenyon. I started to say replacing Tracy here in Montana, but that doesn't work that way at all, right?
No.
That was one of the reasons why I almost said no, by the way, was that bar was really, really high, and that intimidated me and scared me. But there I wrote connections. Tracy is so good at connections, and she always talks about, I serve Montana's credit unions. I'm here for Montana's credit unions. So that humble servant leader and the connections comes out strongly. Two more. And you're the last one I'm going to share. I'm saving you for last. But Brett Thompson in the Wisconsin Credit Union League, wisdom. Brett is the person, and I think you might have a question or two about this later, but Brett's the person, he's my go-to person. He's the person I can ask any question of and know he's going to not tell me what I want to hear, but tell me what I need to hear. He's going to give
people are important.
Good, sage advice, right? He's going to say, have you thought about this? Here are some other considerations. And I also know he's going to keep a confidence, right? So if I need to say something or get his advice on something that's pretty sensitive, I know that I can do it safely. Yeah. And then the last one, of course, is you. And I wrote zest on there, the zest for life, right? The zest for adventure and challenge, and the zest for our movement that is so needed oftentimes when the work gets hard is to remember, right? Remember that. So I think of grit, purpose, commitment, the long view, change the world, give it your all, connections, wisdom, passion, zest, right? Those are all words that have represent mentors in my life and my leadership that I think have helped me get to this point. And there's probably 60 other names I could mention, but those are the quick ones that came top of mind.
I just do not even feel like I qualify to be on that list, my friend. Those are some amazing folks. So. But I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you just a quick question here. I was listening to a podcast a few years ago, and I loved this question, but they were asking Warren Buffett what the greatest investment he ever made in his career was, and he said Dale Carnegie courses.
Sure.
Like that basic. Is there anything that pops out at you when you think about an investment that you're like, wow, I wouldn't have been here without that? You know?
Sure. My philosophy around learning and development, Randy, is focus on your strengths. And sometimes we have things that get in the way that we have to mitigate. But I've described for so long, if you focus so much on your weaknesses, you're going to have really strong weaknesses and your strengths aren't going to get any better, right? So my answer along this line is I've done a lot of facilitation over the years and a lot of leadership training and things like that. So I think the biggest investment for me was in an experiential facilitation certification and then a leadership certification. Both of those exponentially, I think, propelled me in a way to prepare me for this role. And both of those, the things I learned from those two programs, and they were intensive, immersive, like put you on the spot, put you in hard situations. But those things I think prepared me so much for this, and so much so that it's been well over a decade since I've gone through those programs, and I use those skills every single day and are reminded of them every single day. So I think probably those were two of the biggest investments in there.
You know, I've been a part of it after Kilimanjaro as a part of something that you facilitated, and you're a master at it. And I know that you've worked with Joel's team at Humanity. And when you're looking at leaders, when you're looking at building the team, or you're in the past, you know, you were helping other CEOs build out their team, even with the leadership development. What plays into your decision when you're adding to that, or you're making that, you know, when you're building it out, I guess, making that decision making?
I think a lot of it is team cohesion, right? And there are many teams in credit union land have been together a long time. We're starting to see more retirements, a little more turnover, things that we haven't seen in our movement very often. And I've described it, Randy. If you have even one new team member, or you have an existing team member take a different role, poof, right? And I use these exact words, poof, it's a brand new team. And I say it creates a whole lot of poof, but it doesn't create a team. And so I think a big part of my decision process going into this is, what does it take to build that cohesive team of mutual respect, of empathy, of serving one another? Just like in the Credit Union Development Educator program, the DE program, when you show up, titles are left at the door. I'm a big believer in that in leadership too. We all have our roles, and we have titles, and they are important. At the same time, when you're building a team, they need to be maybe de-emphasized a little bit so that you can focus really on what is it we're doing together. Just like on Kilimanjaro, when the 7 of us got near the top, you know, we didn't go in a straight line and have somebody who got there first and somebody who got there 7th. We did it. We locked arms and we did it together. I think that's a good image of a team. A cohesive, strong team is that we do it together.
You, my friend, are a leader because just for our listeners, Gerry would have been the one who got there first and I would have been 7. So we did cross. We all locked arms and went. So
we did it.
And it was a beautiful, it almost brings tears to my eyes to this day. So is there something on the flip side of that that's a no-go? When you hear someone say you're interviewing for a new team to somebody to join, like say your senior leadership team, where something comes out of their mouth and you're like, oh no, that's not going to work.
I think it's probably an ego that is not going to be supportive of the team, right? I think any of us should be willing to wear all the hats. And if somebody says, I don't do that, right? That's not part of my job description, quote unquote, or those kinds of things. I think that would be a big deal breaker for me. I've never done that before. The unwillingness to learn or be flexible, I think, is a big one. And then just to remember who we're there to serve. And that's our credit unions who are there to serve their members, right? And so we serve at their mercy. And so I think that's a really important consideration when we're looking at new leaders in joining the team.
This is interesting, but this is 2 episodes in a row now that ego has been part of the conversation. Tricia, who was the episode before you, her and I had a whole conversation about that getting in the way a bit sometimes, right?
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And we have to remind ourselves of that. I think we all can.
Absolutely.
I'm looking in the mirror as I'm having this conversation, Randy. We have to remember we're not leaders because we don't have egos, right? So it's there. We just have to make sure we remember, right? And remember why we're doing what we're doing and who we're serving and who we're doing it with.
That is absolutely true. So now that you have your team, how do you give feedback? I mean, we've all had a team member, and it's not a knock against them. I don't want you to mention any names, but where you've been disappointed, you thought they could do better. How does Gerry as a leader give feedback?
Right. I think for me, it's feedback that's given in the moment with really clear examples is the best feedback. And in fact, over the years, I've led people for many, many years, Randy, and I always tell my team when it's time to do that big year-end review, where it's more the formalized HR process part, right? And I tell my team, and I'm telling the Montana team too, in that more formalized feedback, if I put anything in there that we have not talked about before, call me on it and I will strike it from the record, right? There never should be a surprise on feedback, in my opinion. So to me, the best feedback is the one that's given, first of all, as close to the moment of truth, if you will, in the feedback. And 2, it needs to be given with the right level of support and grace, and also with clear examples. And it needs to be given individually to the person, you've probably been in the teams that I've been on in the past where it has come to my attention that, right? And you kind of make it's about one person, but you make it about the whole team. Yep. And that's never a good thing. So that would be my best advice.
I think I've maybe been guilty of that before.
Oops.
The broad, yeah. Oh,
sure.
Right.
Yeah. And then I would say the last thing I was to say is, I think we always have to be open to receiving the feedback too. If I'm going to be in a position where I can give feedback constructively and in the right spirit, if you will, I need to make sure that I've set up that culture where the feedback can come to me just as directly, just as clearly, just as immediately too, right? And time and place means a lot in all types of feedback and giving and receiving. So make sure it's in the right time and place.
So a question for you. We've both been around for a little while. Many of the books that out of college or when we were first earlier in our career, kind of, I don't want to say they're irrelevant. You can always find a nugget to take out of something, but that idea of what a CEO is or looks like, I feel like has changed over time. What today to you, what makes a great CEO or a leader in general?
I used the words with Tracy Kenyon earlier. I used the word servant leader. To me, that resonates and speaks volumes to what I think is a true leader. Many of the mentors and those words I mentioned earlier, to me, those are important to me today as well. Transparency, I think, is really important. The willingness to wear all the hats and do all the jobs, I think, is important in leaders today. To reach out and create connections and collaborations, to realize sometimes when you have the CEO title, you feel like you have to have all the answers to all the questions. And if you don't, you make it up. That is not my model of leadership or being a CEO. It's knowing what you don't know. And I can't tell you, Randy, since starting here, how many times I've said that. Well, I don't know what I don't know right now. So please, please educate me. Please help me so that I don't get in trouble in some ways. So to me, they're all of those things. Be willing to listen. And listening is a huge one, I think, for leaders today. Being willing to listen to all the constituents, right? Every stakeholder that's in your life, including your family. Family notices things about you and your leadership that maybe you don't notice in yourself or others don't want to tell you. So making sure you have that as part of your feedback loop, I think is really important too.
I love that. So I wanted to ask, while this is fresh on your mind, right? As far as I know, this is your first CEO gig, right? So did Bob or Tracy give you any advice when it came to board relations? Some of our friends, and I'm thinking of even somebody who we summited with, when they first became CEOs, even though they'd been to board meetings, that type of a thing, they were like, oh, wait, nope, it's me as the pivot point, basically, right?
Sure.
You've got the board, you've got your team. So any words of wisdom from some of these folks around you as you move into this role?
Sure. I think Bob and Tracy both said it, maybe using different words, but very similarly, was open communication, right, is really important. Also, transparency, right? It was just tied to that a little bit too. And then understanding the roles, I think, is the third one. What is the role of the board? What is the role of the CEO? And in fact, just recently I was having conversations with my board chair here too. And we were talking about the dynamic and working together. And the board was really clear saying, we run our credit unions. We're CEOs of our credit unions. We don't run a trade association. That's what we want you to do. We want you to run the trade association. We provide that strategic oversight and strategy. And together we create that. And to really understand where those things lie is, I think, super, super important. And I'm excited. I mentioned part of my decision process to say yes was because of the board and the board dynamic and a really, really strong board. That made all the difference. Now, I know not every credit union CEO and others can talk about that. They might have some challenges or struggles with their board in different ways. And those are things we have to work through together.
That I think how you started that, though, the key is communication, right? That's just with everything. I have a respect that I maybe didn't have earlier.
Sure.
But when Jill and I first started dating, she was still the league president in Connecticut. That idea, whether it's you or when Jill was there or some other people you mentioned, Tracy, Gigi, Jim or Dan. I mean, that when you have boards that are all CEOs of institutions on the road, it's an interesting thing. There's a lot of or there's the possibility for, let's say, egos in the room, right? So it's great when you find a board that doesn't have that and knows the role. So that's amazing. Let me ask you this. You mentioned relevance early on in the show. How do you, as you look forward, how do you continue to take new risks and innovate to make sure that Montana's credit union network is still relevant as we move down the road?
Right. That's a great question. And that's one the board asked me, frankly, in the interview process as well, almost verbatim, Randy. So I don't know if you're pulling from Jill's interview guide or what. But
I didn't. A lot of the times I talk to her before I have guests on, but I'm like, I know Gerry.
Yep. That's great. So I think number one answer probably is listening, and lots of listening. And it's not just listening to the credit unions, although that's critical, listening to the credit unions and what their needs are and how their needs are or maybe are not being met today, either through the league or through other products and services or other organizations. Also listening to staff, who is talking with their peers around the country. I think that's another way. Going outside of our industry altogether. I love that when you look at innovation, let's do grocery stores or let's do something altogether different. Now we're co-ops. We're part of the cooperative movement. So we could look at other co-ops, rural electric or food co-ops or housing co-ops, and what are they doing that we could maybe build upon. So I think listening is a huge part of that. I think being willing to then hear, listening and hearing can be different, right? So
two different things, right? Yep.
Yeah. So hearing such that, hey, let's explore this a little more. Let's take a look at this. So I won't go into detail on an example, but roughly an example, when I was first interviewing and coming into the process, I was thinking about what do I bring to the table and what do others bring to the table within Montana's credit unions? And let's pick brains and let's come up with some ideas that leverage our experiences. We've all been down different journeys over the years. We've seen things work or not work, or there maybe is a tweak of something that almost worked, right? So let's explore it. So I think that's a part of it. the other thing, we talked about the board dynamic, having a board that encourages that innovation and that risk taking. There is not a more supportive board in the country than Montana's credit unions on that, right? They have created a health insurance trust here in the state. It's very unique and it's very successful, right? So they're known for that risk taking, and Montanans are known for our independence in so many ways. And some of that is taking risks. We live with grizzly bears and moose and wild animals, Randy. We have to, have to take some risks here just to survive. But I think those are, I mean, I could go on about that, but I think, and I guess I'll finish this with, it's also the key to our survival and thriving. We can't do what we've always done and expect to be successful. So we have to think out of the box. We have to be creative. And then if something doesn't work, we have to find a way to kill it early and move on, right? And that's sometimes hard, especially if you're passionate about it and it's just not working. I don't know.
I've asked that question a bunch of times on the podcast because for me, that's been one of the toughest things to do professionally is like, if I think the idea will work, sometimes they don't, right? Like it could be time, could just be a bad idea. So, but to kill that idea, because we all have limited resources, right? Like whether it's our time or money or whatever it happens to be. But yeah, that's a tough thing.
Agreed. And the last thing I want to do is get stuck in, the saying called escalation of commitment, where we made the decision, right? And by golly, we're going to see it all the way through to the end. And so we pour more time, more money, more energy into something that just should have been killed a long time ago. So that's and I want to surround myself with others who are going to tell me like this one maybe you ought to just let it go, right?
We have to let it go.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Or at least go try this for a while, right?
Right.
Like let's spend that energy elsewhere.
Absolutely.
I want to be respectful of your time. I know how busy you are right now. Before we move on and have a little fun with the rapid fire questions, was there anything that you were hoping I was going to ask you today that I just didn't?
Nothing totally comes to mind. No, here's a question I thought you were going to ask.
Okay.
Are you going to climb a mountain again? Are you going to do Kilimanjaro again? Are you going to do another? What if Lois says, Gerry and Randy, come and do this? What will you say?
I'm going to ask you that question because I'm not sure if it is happening, but our friend Lois was starting to talk about like maybe doing it again. And I'm like, for me, I might be on the ground team doing a service project. Would you do Kilimanjaro again or?
I know we talked about this and joked about it before. When we got down off the mountain and people asked us the question, I think every single person said, absolutely not, never again, not happening. And you and I both talked, I think a week later or so and said, you know what? The pain of that experience is subsiding a little and the joy is replacing it. So I think if one of my kids asked me, hey, Dad, I know you did this thing, a while ago. I want to go do it. Would you do it with me? I would happily say yes. I would. I don't have this deep desire to climb the biggest peaks or do I'm not that thrill seeker person. If it's for a cause or for a purpose or for my family, right? It's an easier yes. And the ground crew does sound pretty good.
The ground crew sounds good to me. The other one that sounded good to me when I was thinking about it was, I think I'd like the first 4 days, just not the summit day, because I really enjoyed the walk.
Oh, sure. Yep, that's right. The slowly. It was a good walk.
Slowly. I enjoyed the conversation. It was an amazing experience.
Yes, yes, it was.
All right. So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience without a few rapid fire questions. What was the first job ever? Working in the park or?
No, well, I grew up on a farm. So I guess I should say my first job ever was all kinds of farm related, but my first off the farm job was McDonald's. And I loved it. People talk about working at McDonald's or the service industry. I loved it. And I have life lessons that I learned in high school in working at McDonald's. So McDonald's.
That's pretty amazing. There's a reason they've spread all over the world, right? Like they
Exactly.
do know service, quick service. When was the last time Gerry was either personally or professionally amazed?
I'm going to say over the Memorial Day weekend. I went, and I live in Montana, which is a beautiful state with lots to see and do. So I went camping with my 2 sons. I have 3 kids. My daughter's a nurse in Iowa, so my 2 sons are here. And we went camping and we were paddleboarding on a lake, and just to see the stunning sunsets, the stars, the skies. Now we see them every day here in Montana, but I never cease to be amazed by them. And there were some cliffs along the lake that had caves. that just beautiful. So my sons and I were like going in, not super deep caves, but just little caves. So we're climbing around the caves and just seeing the wonder of a 15-year-old and a 29-year-old.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, age group, right? Yeah.
Young men getting older and grown up.
And you.
And me, yeah, in 50, blah, 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 something. Yeah. But seeing the wonder of these young men and seeing the creation and seeing the awe-inspiring pieces, I just looked on them as they were just like wide-eyed looking at these things, just amazed at myself.
What a beautiful shared experience, my friend. Is there something that you're currently working on? What's taking up that personal growth space?
Personal growth space for me is, I have a word of the year that I do every year, and I've done it for many, many years. And in 2023, it's interesting now reflecting back on, moving into the new role and things. But my word of the year in 2023 is evolve.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Jill does the word of the year too. You guys share that.
Yes, we do. And evolve is the word. And how I'm interpreting that, Randy, is putting myself in the role of student in things that I have taught for many, many years. So I'm doing something personally in my church where I've put myself in the role of a student in exact areas when I've coached and taught others. And then at work, at TruStage, before joining Montana's Credit Unions, and now Montana's Credit Unions, continue to put myself in the role of student, specifically in things that I've taught before. So I'm in a group. I'm the one having to do a skill practice or a role play and get feedback when usually I'm the one giving the feedback. I tell you what, it's humbling because sometimes, if you've done it for so long, sometimes you think, okay, I got this down. I'm pretty good at it. And then somebody gives you this really amazing feedback on something. You're like, wow, I never thought of that. And I do that all the time, right? I'm so glad you gave me that gift. So evolve is the word.
I've never picked a word, but I was having a conversation with Lauren Culp, our CEO at CUInsight today. And I'm like, I'm going to say the word again. And I'm like, I bet you're getting sick of hearing me say it, but my word of the year seems to be curiosity.
I love it.
I love curious people.
Yes.
I want to be a curious person. So you mentioned your wife, you've mentioned your kids. Often the leaders, it takes a lot to get to become the CEO and to have the big career. Any hacks you've picked up along the way to make sure the whole life thrives, not just the professional part?
Right. I think it's for one, being committed to making it work. Right. People talk about work-life balance, and I don't think that's possible. It doesn't work. Right. Over the course of an entire year, I think it works, but there's times when you got to give it your all for work and times you got to give it your all for family, and both are important. So I think having the priorities in order makes sense. My family is, everything, and is super important to me. And they would say that, they would see that, I think, as well. So I think that's an important one, involving them in the work that we do. I mean, we work in a movement, right? It's not a job. And I talk to so many people that, you stumble into this thing called credit unions and then you stay forever. So I think that's another hack, the flexibility to do that. If your family can go with or participate or come along, or when we do service work, to have them be a part of this, we're kind of a package deal. That's always important too.
Absolutely. Quick one. What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can listen to from front to back.
I'm a Louis Armstrong. I love the big band. So all things Louis Armstrong would be, for me, I might be a little eccentric that way, but even driving today, I had Louis on and I was singing a lot of Louis. So Louis and Ella, the big bands from the 20s are
I love that.
My albums.
The question from Chairman Harper, who plays you in the movie, the biopic of your life? And we were laughing about this before we hit record.
Yes, I'm going to give you that same answer, even though it wouldn't work. But people have said that I look like John Denver. So the singer John Denver.
So much.
Yeah. So he would, even though he's not alive today, I would love for him to play me. So.
I love that so much just because, I don't know. I think of
Rocky Mountain High. That was my song, right? Yeah, when we had a song, we each had to give some songs for our Spotify playlist. Mine was John Denver, Rocky Mountain High. So anyway,
I love that so much. Is there anything either you're reading or is there that book that you think everybody should read real quick?
Yes. So I I have three that I'm working on. One's called the CEO Tightrope. Caroline Willard from Cornerstone recommended that. And it says how to master the balancing act of a successful CEO, right? So
this is awesome.
I haven't been a CEO before, haven't reported to a board before. So that's a really good one. The one I would say for everybody to read is called The Coaching Habit. Say less, ask more, and change the way you lead forever. That one has been a life-changing book in a lot of ways. I've read it just a couple months ago. And it's 7 questions to ask in a coaching conversation. And I actually had to practice it. We had some young people over at our house. We like to play pickleball. So we were playing pickleball, and afterwards we were sitting around the kitchen table having dessert. And one of them was having a challenge as a young new supervisor at work. And I said, well, let's just practice these 7 questions. So I just walked through them one by one. And in like 7 minutes, she had a plan of attack to go. And it was simply by asking those questions. So those are 2. The third one, Chad Helmanek from the National Crediting Foundation recommended, and it's called Navigating Polarities.
Okay. I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And that'll be another conversation for another time.
Absolutely. We'll link to it all in the show notes so people can pick it up.
That's great.
I thank you so much for being here, my friend. This has been so much fun, and I know I could talk to you for hours, which is a blast for me.
And me.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Any final thoughts you'd like to share before we go?
For all the crediting folks, which is all of us, right? Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep connecting. Keep building bridges. Keep collaborating together. The future is bright for people who need us and what crediting have to offer. There's a lot of hurting people out there, and I know that we together can help in so many ways. And as George Ambato said, let's change the world. Let's literally change the world. How many people are asked that question? And it's sincere, right? So that's the thing. Let's change the world, and let's do it together. We've done it for over 100 years. Let's continue to do it for the next 500 years.
That is the perfect way to wrap up. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. Real quick, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? I know people are going to have a bunch of questions. Email, LinkedIn, what's your poison?
Sure. Either is fine. So let's email Gerry at MCUN.coop.
There you go. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you again, my friend, for being here today. I greatly appreciate you. And before we go really quickly, please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. If you're looking for the books that Gerry mentioned or any of the other guests on the show, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can have your next read on its way from Amazon or Audible, as I often do. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate you all so much for letting me have this much fun doing what I do. Be well, friends.
A few things before we go. Make sure to check out PSCU and be sure to learn more about PSCU TV. They are a longtime partner of CUInsight.com and the podcast, and I am grateful for their support to allow me to have this much fun doing what I do. My guess is my friend Brian Scott is having a blast hosting PSCU TV as well. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all. And if you're looking for one of the books mentioned on today's show or any of the shows from the past, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read is on its way from Amazon. Last, but certainly not least, I want to thank Gerry for being on the show today and all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate all of you. Be well, friends.